Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Biblio Files. This is the program on AADL TV where we take about 5 minutes, well, longer than 5 minutes every week to discuss one book topic. My name is Lucy, and I'm here as usual with Christopher and Amanda, and we have a special guest today, Amy, and we are here today to talk about a favorite audiobook. So, Amanda, do you have a favorite audiobook?
I do. So we recently recorded our year-end episode, and one of the things I mentioned that I discovered in 2021 was I got more into enjoying audiobooks. It's always been a struggle for me, but there's always been one that I enjoyed before I actually liked audiobooks, and that is The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid by Bill Bryson. It was published in 2006. Bill Bryson he's a travel writer, and this is his, it's a memoir. And I think it was published around 2006, and he reads the audiobook version of it. And he is such a good reader. His speaking voice, his inflections are just delightful. It just sucks me in. I've listened to it more than once. It's one of those, like, let's hang out with the old friend Bill and just put it on and listen to it because it's that comforting and amazing. So in the memoir, he discusses being born in Des Moines, Iowa in 1951. And it starts out with him just reflecting on his childhood and some of the things happening in his life. So he was born in 1951. He says he was the third child, second son, first superhero. He creates this alter ego character of the Thunderbolt Kid, which is basically just like putting a blanket around his shoulders with like a baseball jersey or whatever, and he becomes a superhero. He was super inspired by and loved reading comic books as a child. So the book, he grows up in the 50s and 60s. So it reflects a lot about like American culture and pop culture and what was going on in the 50s during that time. He has two eccentric parents. His father is a sports writer for the Des Moines Register. His mother also works there, so she doesn't have time for the motherly household chores or whatever. So they eat strange things. It's just delightful. And he writes it with the way he tells stories of what happened as his childhood. When you're a child, everything is bigger and larger. And the way he tells those stories, he uses that terminology like no one had ever been this happy before, or he was the nicest person they'd ever met. Because when you are 7 and you say that, it is true. So he tells all of these like memories and stories of growing up in the 50s. And of course, you throw in things that are happening during that time, like atomic bombs and communism, or his love of TV dinners, or what a big deal it was, like if somebody got a television set or a refrigerator for the first time. So just reflecting on that sort of time in history, it's just wonderful. And I like memoirs, I like biographies. I love things where a child is experiencing something. So he starts talking about like his childhood and growing up. It's just awesome. I just love the book. And then he tells stories. One of my favorite quotes from the book is after he creates his Thunderbolt Kid character, he says something like the world had just become a dangerous place for morons, which gives you that sense of that childlike sensibility of how he viewed the world. And I just loved it. He reads it. It's just amazing and wonderful. I started listening to it for the third time last week just because I just love it that much. And the way he talks about things and his quirky family and just what was happening in the 50s. So this was the first audiobook besides nonfiction books by David Sedaris. This was the first audiobook that I read and fell in love with. And it's sort of like the first love. It's still like one of my favorite audiobooks of all time. So that is my very about Bill Bryson's The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid. Amazing audiobook. Christopher, did you find an amazing audiobook to tell us about?
I did, but I wonder if Amy wants to go next.
It's all good. Yes, I'm excited to go. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the Biblio Files. If you look at my AADL account, my holds are all different things you guys have recommended. So thank you for expanding my horizons. I'm a bookkeeper here at the library, so it is very strange for me to be in front of people. My preferred is being a worker, being behind the scenes. But I love books, and I want to talk about one of my favorite audiobooks. I am a big fan of The Daily Show and Trevor Noah. And so my book is Born a Crime, autobiography by Trevor Noah. And the library has a myriad of options for this. So they've got the book, they've got, he adapted it for teens. So there's a adaptation there, and we have that. We have the CD, and I did a little researching, and he is turning this into a movie. So they've been working on it this year. They have a cast and director, but so I'm looking forward to that. But basically, this book is about him growing up in South Africa during apartheid, and he was born to a white Swiss father and a black Xhosa mother. So this was illegal for black and white to fraternize, let alone create another human. So that's why the title is Born a Crime. And so, you know, at various times in his life, he had to be hidden from police and things like that. So a lot of his anecdotes are they're intense, but if you know him, the way he delivers things, it is a beautiful, beautiful book. I first heard him talk about this book on NPR, and it was one of those times where you park and you don't get out of your car because you have to see like where the story is going. And he was telling a story about how much code switching he had to do because he was often, he would decide he needed to pass as white to be safe. He needed to pass as black to be safe. And then all the different languages in South Africa. So he says, I'm just going to read from his words because he says about code switching. I think it was something I inherited from my mother, who learned to do it. I, like a baby duckling, was merely mimicking the survival traits that my mother possessed. And I came to learn very quickly that language was a powerful, powerful tool. And the reason I love this audiobook, I had read the book, but but hearing him in his own voice code switch, so he'll talk in different languages, it is amazing. And if you ever are on YouTube, looking at his outtakes from The Daily Show, if he sees or hears that someone's French, he will immediately start conversing in French with this person. And he just totally switches over the body language. It's incredible to watch his interactions. So it is a joy to hear him tell this story. Even though it is difficult material, you know, jail was very normalized because of his father and his mother. His mother would get jailed quite frequently for a few days at a time. And that was just part of his life. So I really feel like this is one of those audiobooks where you can go for a long walk with a friend and hear their stories. And it's just a great audiobook. So now on to Christopher.
Well, I listened to a book that was very different from the two of you. I listened to No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. This is a crime story with a lot of guns, killing, and violence. And it takes place in 1980 on the Mexico-Texas border. A hunter, Llewellyn Moss, stumbles on a drug deal that's gone bad. Most everyone is dead, and Moss decides he's going to take the cash, which is $2 million. What he doesn't realize is that everyone will now be after him and the money. And one of the characters who is after him is a relentless psychopath, Sugar. So, as I said, there is a lot of killing and violence. Sugar has a very unique way of killing people. And that's all I really want to say about the plot. Some of you may have seen the movie by the Coen brothers with Javier Bardem playing Sugar, and it's a great movie. Now I want to talk about this particular audiobook that I really enjoyed. I feel like it's particularly suited for an audiobook because Cormac McCarthy originally wrote this as a screenplay. And the book feels very much like a screenplay. And Tom Staschulte, who did the reading of the book, really brings it alive. So the screenplay or the original book is very spare with its dialogue. There's no he said, she said, this person said, any of that. It's gone. But the narrator really brings the dialogue and the characters to life with so much inflection in all the characters' voices. I went back to the book to check it out, and I kind of missed hearing Tom Stichulte's voice doing all these very funny, not funny, very interesting characters and bringing them right off the page. So it was fascinating to get that version of the story as well. I loved it, and now I want to go out for more books on CD, even though I know that's not, it's not hip right now, books on CD. I know I'm still behind the times, but it's a lot of fun to read. Lucy?
At least you didn't say books on tape. So
I still sometimes want to think of books on CDs as books on tape.
I know it's this vernacular, right? This like,
yeah,
just,
I kind of want to put that in the vernacular now. Let's just call listening to audiobooks on Libby listening to an audio tape. Books on tape.
books on tape.
Yeah. But Christopher, that sounded like a really great audiobook for you to read and enjoy, because I think part of a lot of people don't like audiobooks or can't get into audiobooks. And part of the trick is finding like an accessible book that you just really feel tells a good story and the narrator is good, because it's got to be a good narrator. So I'm really glad you found one that you enjoyed and that you're inspired to do more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Did they have sound effects? Because you said there was a lot of gunfire. So
Nope.
it was just all the narrative.
Yeah, it's just a straight reading of the book, but with really well done character voices, but all read by a single person.
Wow. Well, the book that I want to talk about is the opposite of being read by a single person. It is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, and this was his first novel. It's actually his only novel. He writes short stories and essays, but this is read by a cast of 166 people, and there are a lot of famous voices in there. It's really interesting to listen to. It sort of brings to mind like Our Town, the play by Thornton Wilder. Reminds me of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but also kind of like I'm reading As I Lay Dying by Faulkner. So it's this sort of mix of these different types of stories. And the cast does such a good job of delivering this book. And it's in a moving, but intelligent and funny and highly entertaining way. So the plot of this book, there's two main plot lines, and they're both pretty sad, but in a strange way, there's also a lot of humor in this book. And one of the reasons is that a lot of the narrators are characters from beyond the grave. They are voices of the residents of the Oak Hill Cemetery, which is where President Lincoln is just burying his son, Willie. So there's all these residents who exist in this kind of limbo, which is the Bardo, and they are stuck in the Bardo because they have unfinished business on Earth, and they actually don't even know that they're dead. So the way they talk about their surroundings is very interesting, because they are, in the graveyard buried, but they don't understand that. So it's really kind of amusing and intelligent in that way. And it's told by it happens on the night that Willie Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's son, dies. And these characters are talking about this new person coming into their world. And some of the voices, like the main story is told by a character named Hans Vollman, who is Nick Offerman. Nick Offerman reads that. Roger Bevins III, which is read by David Sedaris. And then the Reverend Everly Thomas is read by George Saunders. So those three are carrying like one of the main narrative lines. But then there's all these other characters that come in, and you start to recognize their traits and their quirkiness by whose voice it is. The other part of the story is these chapters that are focused on this like really sad story of a father and his newly departed son. And it's extremely poignant. You have this father struggling to say goodbye, and the son is having difficulty letting go of the earth. And it's interesting because the father is Abraham Lincoln, and he's also the president of a country that is at war. So we get this inside point of view of his personal mourning of his son at the same time that he's burdened with the agony of the war in his country. And so he makes comparisons between those young men and his son. And so the storylines are really interesting, but the cast of 166 people definitely keeps you on your toes. And it's rather than a book, it feels like a performance. Some of the other voices that do a great job, Julianne Moore, Bill Hader's in there, Megan Mullally, Susan Sarandon, Ben Stiller, Carrie Brownstein, Don Cheadle. There's like lots of famous voices that's fun to pick up and recognize. But I do listen to quite a few books, and I've never listened to a book quite like this. The other thing that listening to the book helped me do, I tried to read it, and listening to the audio version kind of gave me a better sense of how the book was going to move. And then I loved the audiobook. I read the book, and I loved the book after listening to it. And then I listened to it again. So it was a really favorite listen, and just really unique, I think, as far as audiobooks go. So that is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. And I also wanted to say, Amy, that another favorite audiobook of mine is Born a Crime. And when you're saying that you sat in your driveway, like you had the driveway moment listening to Trevor Noah on NPR, I actually sat in a parking lot and finished listening to Born a Crime because I was like, I just have to be listening to this. So that is a really great one. Does anyone else have any? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do want to listen to that because too, one of the reasons I enjoyed the Thunderbolt Kid by Bill Bryson is it's a memoir. It's his story. And I love it when the author they read their own story. So by hearing like the person tell their story, there's just something captivating about it, because it is like hanging out with a friend where they're just sitting there like, hey, this is what I'm doing today, or this was my childhood. And it's just, there's just something captivating about hearing somebody's story, like, and having them read it to you instead of reading the words on the page. So I do want to listen to that because I adore Trevor Noah.
Yeah, he's great.
Well, I was very excited about doing this, and Trevor Noah is my favorite, but the autobiographies are a little bit of a cheat. My favorite genre is fiction and novels, so I felt weird only talking about an autobiography. So I do want to throw out that the book My Sister, the Serial Killer, is a really entertaining read. I started it, but I got stuck. I wasn't quite understanding what was a joke and what was serious. And so I bought the audiobook, and all of a sudden it all clicked. Like the names of the people, the person who was reading it, it's two sisters, and one sister, is the fair, beautiful, smart, elegant, and the other is, the unbeloved sister. And even just her saying their names were Cora Day, very sharp. And then the other one is Ayula. And just hearing her say that, I was like, oh, I just missed the most basic thing. When you get a really good person reading the novel to you, it just comes alive. And I had her start at the beginning for me, and I realized like, oh, that was sarcasm. I took that part literally. And it's just an incredible, the narrator's voice is just enchanting, and it could be so cringy with the novels. So I go to things like this to make sure. I have gotten burned so many times with novels where the man is speaking very high or the woman is growling to be a man. So it is, I'm glad two of you brought some novels, so I will definitely try those. But that My Sister, the Serial Killer is a tough one to understand what is literal and what is sarcasm. And it really brought it alive for me.
Yeah, I just reread that book and forgot how funny it actually is, even though it's about a serial killer.
Right.
It's such a good book. I recommend it, reading it or listening to anybody. But
And then talking to someone after. Because
yes, yeah, definitely.
you might not realize you've got some unreliable narrators.
Yes, for sure. Well, that wraps up our episode on audiobooks. As always, we love to hear from you about any great audiobooks that you have listened to or looking forward to listening to. You can leave those comments below. And Amy, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Bibliophiles. It was great to have you here. And we will be back next week with another book topic. So thank you.